Yeah, so today we're going to go through the risk management, which is 6.4. We're going to go through the first learning outcome, which is 1.1, again, the role of the risk management function in business. So what this requires is for you to identify a risk within your workplace. This can be done by identifying a risk in the workplace, or it can actually be from research. So something that could potentially happen in your workplace where there's going to be a risk involved, or it's already happened. For example, say you was working with service users that self-harmed, that would potentially be a high risk. So therefore, to reduce the risk factors of this happening, you'd put a plan in place. So you would actually, if there was knives around, you would keep everything locked. If you identified that money was a risk, that economical factors was a risk, that would be in your risk assessment, and you'd be trying to put in a plan to ensure that you wasn't at a loss. So you need to identify and examine your company's policy of the risk, of the management of risk, because all your companies will come from, all the policies will come from legislation, and then in work practice there will be a policy from the legislation. You're to review the nature and the level of insurance coverage if a risk was to happen. So therefore, if it was an employee that had a risk, if it was a service user that had a risk, they could sue the company potentially. So you need to see what you've got in place to protect yourself. And then from that, from the risk, you need a response to the risk, a plan of action, then you need control, and then you need to monitor the risk. Do you all understand that? Do you have any questions?
No.
No, are you sure? You all okay?
No. Okay.
Sorry?
Very okay.
All right, okay, great. The next one is 1.2, which is assess the role of the business function in the management of risk. So the functions that have a role in managing the risk. So it is important that you identify a risk so that you can link theoretical principles to the risk. So like I said, you might identify that it's a factor of money, because most businesses are for profit, that is the primary purpose. Or you might identify that it's a safeguarding issue. You know, it might be for your clients that something potentially could happen where you feel that a risk assessment needs drawing up because there is a potential risk that you identified. So with the risk, you need to link it at this level to fair risks, to show me that you've understood and show me what you know. So the first fair risk that is, it's just a suggested fair risk, is using Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I don't know if any of you have ever come across Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Do you know anything about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or have you heard of it? Yeah, right, okay, that's great. So you might know that it's a motivational hierarchy, and it starts at the bottom, and that's like the survival needs, the primary needs, and then obviously it goes up to self-actualization. So if you link that to your business and then you link it to a risk assessment, I put it down that you might want to potentially use that one for...
Hello?
Yeah, hi.
Oh, hi, it's Matthew here. I'm on the phone because my computer won't go audio.
Oh, right, okay, that's fine. Just as long as you can hear me. Can you see the screen? Oh. Okay, we're on 1.2. I'm just going through some fair risks, and now we're on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which you could potentially use to link to your risks, your identifiable risks. So you might want to use that to the service user. The driver is a motivational driver of the needs. So you're starting off. Are you familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Matthew?
Yeah.
No.
No, okay. It's basically the idea, well, we'll go back onto the slide which will give you an indication of what it is about. The second one is Carol's corporate social responsibility, which the primary purpose of this service is that the business is to make profit. So you can see that there's two very different theories that you can use. One's about the service users, which will be Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or you can link that to the employees. And the second one, which is Carol's corporate social responsibility, is linked to for-profit business. So when you come to identify your risk, you will fit the theorist in to where you see fit, which will be determined by your risk. I'll just go on to Maslow's hierarchy of needs just to give you a bit of a deeper understanding. So if you was using this to the service users, or you was using Maslow's hierarchy of needs for employees, it might be the fact that they're at the low level, they're disengaged, they're only there for the money, but obviously you want them to be motivated in terms of bringing profit into the organisation, profit into the business. So you would hopefully get them from the survival needs, moving them up to the security needs, and then the belonging needs, the importance, and the very top, self-actualization, where they're invested in the business, where they actually want to work there and they have self-belief in themselves through the company. So that's Maslow's hierarchy. So if you feel that you could link that to your identifiable risk, then if you show me what you know on paper, because one of the things, it says examine for your learning outcome. So you need to be putting in the strengths, the weaknesses, show how you've engaged. So if you use, for example, give me scenarios where it fits within your business model. Or the second one, a second theorist, is Carol's corporate social responsibility pyramid. So the first factor there is the economic factors. This is the responsibility of the business to be profitable, which most businesses are. The only way to survive and benefit society in the long term. So that's the very bottom of the pyramid, but it is different to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because he's talking about motivation and employees and doing it in a different way. You could potentially play the two theorists off each other to show a high knowledge of understanding and how one may be not suitable and the reason why you chose another one. Just as long as you show me what you know on paper and how it links to your risk, will be perfectly fine. And then it goes on to the legal duties. So basically anything legal obviously comes from the law, and it'll link to legislation, and then from the legislation will be your work policy within your practice. So if you link the policy to the risk assessments, so for example, you might link it to health and safety and identify a risk within health and safety, and then link your policy to it. And the last one of the pyramid is the responsibility to give back to society. So it's saying that, you know, you've made profit, all the legalities are all upheld, and then this time you want to put back to charitable events but potentially, even though it looks like you're giving back to the community, you can look behind them scenes in the business model as you're promoting the business. The reality is, even though you might be doing charitable events, you're putting yourself out there, so it's promoting your business, and hopefully by doing that, it will bring in more profit for your business.
Yeah.
Yeah, are you all okay? Do you have any questions? Are you okay?
I'm okay with the theory, yeah. I think so. I suppose there's no sort of measure of what's the term, sort of magnitude, or sort of what percentage of
Yeah, it is a fair.
Profit go into these things.
Yeah, I understand what you mean. With any theorist, you can play them off each other. And if you don't buy into a certain theorist like that I spoke about there, that's up to you to go and do your own readings and your own research. And you might buy into another theoretical perspective. It doesn't mean what I'm actually saying. You might think, no, that doesn't tally up at all with any of my business. So therefore, you might produce from like journal articles, books, readings, and you might put it into your own words, and that's great because you're showing me what you know and how it fits within your business and your corporation and how you're minimizing risks within your business and how you're linking theoretical perspectives. So if you don't buy into these, then that's completely fine. But it just gives you an insight of what people do say about business. But you can, like I said, you don't have to use them theorists. As long as you do use a theory that shows that you understand, that is fine.
Would the average care home for the elderly or the average district general hospital have risk management assessed by the CQC as part of the safety criteria?
Yeah, well, everybody will have a risk assessment. Every organisation will have a risk assessment, and like safeguarding will be paramount. It'll be really high. Like a scenario there will be, if you're talking about a care home, would be the fact that you've got to get service users out of bed because, you know, abuse or neglect could be high, even if a service user had bed sores. So if I was writing a risk assessment for there, I would be saying, you know, safeguarding vulnerable adults, adhering to policy and legislation, that you're minimising the risk by being aware of the policies in place, and you know you're trying to move service users so that people aren't suing the company. You don't want anybody to sue, so you should be working in adherence to your policies and legislation within your practice.
Yeah.
Is that okay? Do you understand that bit?
No, carry on, that's fine.
Oh, great, okay. So yeah, if you need to look into your readings, look into your policies, it's asking you to identify a risk yourself. So that's up to you whereabouts you take it. And like I said, I've given you some suggested theories, but you don't have to use them. If you feel you can do some reading around them areas and make it fit, then great. But then if you come across some other things within journal articles, then you can paraphrase them and link them in. Obviously, it needs to be in accordance to the Harvard referencing system. When it says examine, it means investigate, put like the strengths, the weaknesses, what it looks like in practice. So you might use, for example, just to show that you've engaged and how you've linked it to your own practice. So just as a quick recap here, it's saying like identify the risk. So you're going to pick a risk out. The response, so how are you going to plan to minimise the risk, control and monitor it. And for the second part, you're going to link it to the legislation and in line with your work policy. Is that all okay? Do you have any questions?
When it says, what's the difference between show you have
Show you've
understood and reflective practice? Is that the same thing?
Reflective practice, if you're a reflective practitioner, it's trying to take a scenario where you feel that you may have not done potentially well, or on the other hand, it can be well, but you can use, if you're doing a reflection, I would link it to theory, so you could link it to Cole's learning theory, and you can link it to Gibbs. It shows that you've reflected on something and you've took something from that. So reflective practice is different, but that is more of a high grading criteria. So you can always link reflective practice into any assignment that you're doing, because it's just showing that you actually know what you've talked about and you reflect on your own practice and showing how you've learnt from that, how you've understood that, where you're going to go from.
Because I was going to say, it's not as if it's not really as if you can do a sort of an MCQ exam at the end of it to prove you've got up to scratch, is it? Like, that's what I mean.
No, somebody what you know through writing, then it's more or less you've done an exam, but you're being marked by through you writing, if you understand.
So you're talking about show you've understood. Who's the examiner in this example then?
Yeah. Say that again, sorry.
Who's the examiner for showing, when you show you've understood, is that basically the director of the company?
Yeah, well, because obviously you have learning outcomes, so you've got learning outcomes all through these assignments. So showing somebody what you know is, say, if you've done some reading and you think it links to risk assessment, and then you write a paragraph about risk assessment and how it links to your work practice, that's showing me that you've understood, and that's showing me what you know. It's showing me that you know your stuff, and I can tick it off that actually he knows exactly what he's talking about. It fits with the grading criteria. So that's basically what it is saying. Does that make any sense to you at all?
Yes, I suppose the tool is different in all scenarios. I suppose it might it even appear in your, I suppose it could appear anywhere, couldn't it? Might it appear in some professional's appraisal templates and documents or something, I suppose. But I suppose you're really aiming it at the company, aren't you, and at the the board of directors kind of thing eventually, or at least if they having it there in case they call round to have a look at it. Yeah.
You've for this is actually only showing me that you've understood, because I'll be marking it to check that you've hit this grading criteria. But for in your work, in your professional practice, obviously you understanding the policies is going to benefit you. You understanding risk assessments and be able to draw a risk assessment up and reduce risk in the workplace is going to make you a better practitioner.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting how much is still. I mean, it's not as if I'm aware that there's a wide gulf between best practice and negligence. I think most people accept that, or gold standard practice and negligence, and that most people sit somewhere in between, and that no templates or work system or CQC system, nothing is 100%. You can never all the risks and managements that have to be done. I mean, I'm aware that it certainly appears in a number of care home environments. They've got some very regimented settings for risk assessments for set categories like moving and handling or personal evacuation plans or those kind of things. But I wonder whether they're part of a fixed system of review, or whether this is part of a experimental think tank. What percentage of it is mandatory and what percentage of it is strivations for gold standards?
Yeah, well, as long as you're aware of the legislation and you're adhering to legislation and then your policy within practice to minimise a risk, then potentially you are adhering to best practice, because you're doing all these things to prevent anybody suing the company, insurance reasons, also for the service users, you're safeguarding the service users by doing this.
Minimal acceptable risk management,
Yeah. So basically, that's all your assignment's about. So you basically fed back to me what you need to be actually writing down and showing me that you actually know what you're talking about on paper, because obviously you do know what you're talking about, and that's great. So it's just putting it into a format where I can actually tick it off and say, yeah, you completely have engaged and you've understood exactly what it is you're expected to do with these learning outcomes. Does anyone else have any questions or? No? I'll say that as a no. Right, well, thank you for attending the session. And the next session. Go on, sorry.
Will this be on Moodle now? Will this be on Moodle?
Yeah, do you want me to? I can upload the PowerPoint on. Go on, sorry.
Sorry, breaking up. So sorry, but it's just that I had an email and it had a paperclip attachment. When I opened it up, it was a grey folder which shows it's corrupted, so I couldn't open it. So I was just wondering whether whether these slides were actually now for me on Moodle.
Well, what I'll do is I'll email the slides to you, and I'll also upload them on Moodle so you can go through them, and email me any questions or anything that you feel you might need to email me.
What's your email address? What's your name and email address? So sorry to be so bold. Your name and email address?
Caroline at ukversity.co.uk. Do you want me to, have you got that? Do you want me to write it in the chat?
No, well, no, it's all right. Is it just CAROLINE?
Yeah, yeah.
ukversity.co.uk.
Yeah.
Brilliant. That's fine by me. Thanks.
All right then. Thank you for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Right. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.